Still water in here. This would be called a bedrock mortar. When the Spanish first entered what's now California, they called these things morteros. And they noticed that the American Indians were using them to grind seeds, things like that. What do you... what's the name of the device that you use in the mortar? That's right, a pestle. That's right, and this is what you grind with. Now, this is a portable kitchen device. A little bit heavy, but you could take this with you and move to another village, or if you traveled at different times of the year. This is called a metate, and this was also used for grinding. Who knows the name of the device that's used with the metate? It's the Spanish word for hand. It's called a mano. A mano goes with the metate, and the pestle goes with the mortar. So this was definitely their kitchen. So where was the cupboard?
There.
How about right here?
Oh.
What kind of tree is this? This is called a scrub oak. It's the only kind of oak tree that grows here in the Mojave Desert. And it produces acorns. That was a very important part of the diet of the Cahuilla and the Serrano people. They would grind that here. They would also process seeds from another interesting desert tree. It's right over here. That's a pinyon pine. That's the only kind of pine tree that grows here. Have any of you ever had pine nuts before?
Not really.
Maybe at a trendy restaurant, or in that hummus that they make at Trader Joe's. Those little pine nuts.
This is horrible.
Now it's a moth. And the moth is less efficient, unfortunately. Right. So the adobe barn.
Can't find these birds.
Where was that?
Too close to the sun.
Again, yeah, leave everything. Thank you. Yeah, that does look like a piece of pottery. I don't know if that's from American Indians or if it was more modern. I'm not so good with telling that. It looks pretty modern to me, but I'm not sure. So the adobe barn. Where was it?
Can't even capture them.
That's right behind me.
Can't even capture.
Nice tire.
That used to be an armored car. That's one that we bought. Early 1930s.
This car was an armored car?
Yeah.
Doesn't look like much now.
No, it's pretty old.
Wow.
Oh, you guys, let's go. Can you get back a little bit?
So where did Bill Keyes get the material to build this structure? Chicago. He drove all the way to Chicago. He flew to Chicago. Wait, there weren't any planes. Yeah, there were.
That corrugated steel came from Banning.
Yeah. It probably was in Banning at one point. Now, this is, when other people's homesteads failed or their mines failed, he drove over there and he tore it all down and brought it over here. So really he was starting a salvage operation. The steel, these were cyanide tanks that were used at mines. And he cut them open and pounded them flat. That's what's on the roof and the sides. Some of these other pieces of metal were maybe tracks from old mines for mining cars to roll along. All the tools and equipment, he also salvaged those from homesteads and mines. So he actually didn't pay for any of this. He also, by the way, was illiterate. He didn't have an education. He didn't know anything about engineering. But he was able to figure out how to build this and how to fix things like trucks. If someone's car or truck, and this was an armored car, by the way, that transported gold and money to banks, he figured out how to fix it and got it running. All the vehicles that are on this property, he either paid for or someone just abandoned it because it broke down. And he was able to get all these things working again without much knowledge or skills that he had from going to school or anything like that. And he was able to figure out how to do that. So at this point he had a property, he had some structures. And that's one of the most important things that we need in the desert. Water. So one of the first things that they did was dig a well. So we're going to move around to the back of the truck and we'll see one of the first wells that was dug on this property. Folks, come on around here, please. So it was the McCaney brothers who dug this well. They got down about 40 feet and they didn't hit any water. They didn't play. And Keys ended up continuing to dug down another 20 feet still. All he did was play. However, clay could have been useful. Some of this goes to mix clay, ash, sand. Basically, you get a
I'd have to say this is the accelerator right here.
See it for a second.
It looks to me like it was put in a better place. It's closer to the stream. They did hit water. They used a number of different devices to get water out of this well. Buckets, hand pumps. They tried wind power at one point. He even hooked up an electric generator. I believe that was part of a tractor or some type of mining equipment. I've seen other equipment like this, like over at the Desert Queen Mine and other places. Generators like this basically were used as cable winches for mining. He hooked that up here. At one point, there was another device called a windlass that was used to drop buckets down into the well. Now the young boys who lived here, all the children, as a matter of fact, had chores to do, and it was very hard work, and they worked very long days. The boys, their job was to get water to bring back to the house. Now the house didn't have running water, but Mrs. Keys said that she always had running water because the boys had to run back and forth with water. So, yeah, that's a big one. That was their idea of running water, having someone run back and forth. A little different than in all of our houses that we've lived in, I'm sure. Now, one of the boys, Ellsworth, when he was 10 years old, he was operating this windlass, and somehow the handle slipped out of his hand, and it came around and struck him on the back of the head. He ended up dying less than a year later. He spent his last few months in a coma at a hospital. That hospital is now Loma Linda Hospital near San Bernardino. That's also where Mrs. Keys had all of her 7 children. 3 of those children died here at the ranch. Only one, from what I could find, because of trauma. The other 2 died at very young children, like after maybe a few days or a few weeks. So they weren't very old.
So what's this there?
Now, Mrs. Keys, again, she had all of her children at that hospital. So each time that she was going to have a child, or with Ellsworth as he was laying on his deathbed, she spent quite a bit of time over at that hospital. While she was there, she asked the doctors and the nurses if she could read a medical encyclopedia. So that's what she did. So she actually learned about medicine from all the time that she spent at the hospital. So she was kind of increasing her skills there at the hospital. She ended up being given drugs and bandages and things like that to bring back to the ranch because other ranchers in the area had started to find out about her. Oh, that Mrs. Keys, she can fix your hurt mule. Oh, our baby's sick. We should bring her over there. So if you had a sick animal or a child or someone in your family was injured, they came over here to the Keys Ranch to see if someone could help. And Mrs. Keys did. She had bandages, medicine, things like that. The hospital also set up kind of a little deal with her where she sold vitamins to the public. Imagine if you went to your doctor now and asked if you could sell drugs to your neighbors. How would that go over? You'd probably find yourself in jail or something. But back then, again, and this was really the Wild West, they were willing to do things like that, and you'd go wherever you thought you could get help.
It's almost like...
There's even a story of a Native American woman who brought a sick child here for Mrs. Keys to take a look at. So yeah, this is where you would have gone. You would have tried here first before spending a few days trying to go to a hospital. Easy doing that. She was also a bonnet maker. She started kind of becoming an entrepreneur, not just selling vitamins and trying to help injured people, but she canned vegetables and fruit. That's right. They had quite a successful orchard right here behind us. Here's a photograph of what that orchard looked like. The Keys family grew just about everything that they needed here. They grew beans and squash, different kinds of fruit. No citrus because it gets too cold here in the winter. They grew almost every single thing that they needed. The only thing that they really went to town to purchase were 3 of my favorites: coffee, sugar, and flour. Those were the only things that they couldn't grow here. So they would go buy large quantities of that, making a journey to, later on, in later years, the nearest city was Indio. So that was still quite a long drive from here. So they had a very successful orchard here, and it actually spread beyond this area. Now every once in a while the river here would overflow and kind of damage part of their orchard. So Mr. Keyes decided that they should build a wall to kind of protect the orchard, and we're going to walk along that wall right now. Now he actually constructed this, and a lot of the work was done on his own without using any power tools or power machinery. Take a look at these rocks around here. Most of them are quite huge. How did he get them into such small, perfect pieces, and how did he put them there without using power machinery? So let's walk along the wall, and we'll talk about that at our next stop.
Are we gonna go over there? And
This one over here. Cherries?
Mess with it, but things that are consumable, you can actually consume.
Is that sort of some sort of an apple?
I think that one's an apple tree, yeah.
This?
Part of it. He looked for places in the rock where there was already a crack, and he hand drilled these holes. How long would that have taken? Probably quite a while. And then once the hole was there, he'd put a wooden dowel, a piece of wood in there, and dump water on it. And the wood would swell. Especially on a cold night where it gets below freezing here, it would swell so much that it would make the cracks get bigger. And he would basically just keep doing that over and over until he got a nice piece that size. Some people say, oh, dynamite. Well, dynamite would just have broken it up into too many pieces. But speaking of dynamite, that was something that was used in gardening. The soil here had a lot of clay in it, so one of the chores that the young boys did was they would drill a hole in the ground and stick a piece of dynamite in it and blow it up. And that's where they would plant the fruit trees. Imagine if your son, that was his job, to handle dynamite.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, Willis Key said it was a lot of fun. He really enjoyed it. He said that was so fun, helping out in the garden using dynamite. Here's the Keys Lake that's up there behind the dam.
Is that wall, man-made wall?
Yeah.
Have they ever used
It's
fishing with
kinda-
dynamite?
No. They did stock it with fish. And in the summer when it was hot, the family would swim in it. In the wintertime, it would freeze up, and again, sometimes they would even ice skate on
First season or second season?
That's what it looks like now.
it. Yeah,
First season
this
or second
is
season?
from 1917, yeah. But I hiked up there the other day. It still is holding water. It's still doing quite well. Quite a feat of engineering for someone without an education, who doesn't know anything about engineering or masonry. He did come up with some pretty unique ways to construct things like that. Right behind you, something worth seeing. There's some bed springs that you probably see around the property.
Hello.
These bed springs were used in construction. There was no such thing as rebar out here. Or they couldn't afford it. Pieces of metal that they use in making buildings. It's a thin, it's a thin piece of metal, and they fill it in with concrete. He used these bed springs.
Wow.
And just poured the concrete inside of that. Yeah, that was kind of a unique thing. Again, part of the salvage operation here. You'd have to look for ways of making things out of what was available to you. You couldn't just bring in things, and he couldn't afford to bring in things. That's a pretty good sized fence lizard.
What kind of lizard is this?
So, what we're standing on here was his last big project. He wanted to build a wall to kind of block the stream. He felt that any bit of water that was passing by here was being wasted, and he wanted to harness that for cattle and for mining. As a matter of fact, mining uses a whole lot of water. All the equipment has to have water pumped through it. It's quite an undertaking. If any of you have ever been up to Lost Horse Mine, remember they had to get water up to that mine. Pretty difficult thing to do. The Ryan family and others who owned it had a lot of money, and they built generators on steam power that pumped water up to the top of the mountains here in the park. Back then, that was a major feat of engineering to be able to do something like that. Here at the Keys Ranch, things were a little more downscale, I guess, a little more kind of living off of the land. He didn't have any high-tech devices. Over here, he was nice enough to write in the dates that he worked on this, 1951 to 1958. In 1951, he was 71 years old. That's how old he was when he started working on this. 1951 was after what he calls his college years. His college years were spent in prison. That's right. He was sent to San Quentin for manslaughter in what is called by many historians to be the last gunfight of the Old West. Now, there was some, if you had control of water, your neighbors might not like you so much back in the Old West. If you had water, you basically had power. Water was worth more money than gasoline was back then. It might be going that way again sometime, we're not sure. But back then, that was the truth of it. You needed water for your cattle, you needed water for your home, for mines, things like that. Another gentleman bought some property that used up part of an access road that Keyes traveled on daily to go to Wall Street Mill. There's a nice short walk that you could do today also. You could go out to the mill site and see that structure. It's still in perfect condition. There are a couple old vehicles there. Basically, the law said if you always had a road that crossed through there, you were still allowed to use it. It was a right-of-way, even if someone else bought that property. So Keyes had to cross through just a little corner of this other gentleman's property. This guy was named Worth Bagley. Worth Bagley was he had been a sheriff who had gotten kicked off of the force for being too rough on people. And he took up ranching. He may have been in cahoots with some other ranchers who didn't like the Keyes family. Either way, he had been telling people that if that Bill Keyes crosses my land again, I'm going to kill him. And he even left a sign for Keyes one day. It's my last warning, stay off of my property. So one day when Bill Keyes was coming back from Wall Street Mill to return here to the ranch, on the road some logs had been placed across it. So he stopped to move them. And as the story went, Worth Bagley jumped out of the bushes and fired a few shots at him. Bill Keyes returned fire and killed Worth Bagley. It sounded like self-defense to me, but Keyes went into town and told the sheriff about it, and he ended up being charged and convicted of manslaughter and sent off to prison. Here's a photo of Bill Keyes standing where Worth Bagley was. The deputy sheriff there is standing where Keyes was when he returned fire. This is after Keyes got out of prison many years later. He returned to the scene. So after about 4 years in prison, they were willing to parole him, but he refused to go. He said he wanted a full pardon because he had acted in self-defense. And the judge said no, so he stayed in prison. Now, Mrs. Keyes left the ranch. She didn't want to stay out here without her husband, and especially with what was going on in the area. Her brother and some other family members occupied this land for those years to protect it, because things always went missing, according to Willis Keyes. If they would go out of town for a few days, stuff would disappear. So they had family members watching things. Now, Mrs. Keyes befriended a man by the name of Earl Stanley Gardner. Does anyone recognize that name, Earl Stanley Gardner? He wrote the Perry Mason novels, and he developed the Perry Mason television show. He was a retired attorney, and he and some other retired attorneys had something called the Court of Last Resort, where they went and looked at old cases that they thought were kind of fishy, or they thought where people had been convicted wrongly, and they went and re-examined those and got things dismissed. So he eventually got Bill Keyes released from prison, and a few years later, Keyes, actually in 1956, so more than a few years later, Keyes got a full pardon from the governor. So it took that long, but he did return here to the ranch. So while he was in prison, he learned to read. He studied engineering, masonry techniques, things like that. The wheels were probably turning in his mind while he sat in prison. I'm going to build a new dam. I'm going to build a new chimney. There's a photograph of that chimney at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. as being kind of primitive homestead architecture. So that's actually a state and national monument. It was built by hand by someone who didn't even have a degree. He and another gentleman who had assisted him with it. And it's still standing. So it's in pretty good shape. We have earthquakes here all the time. It would have toppled if it wasn't constructed properly. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Oh, by the way, this is the gravestone. Keyes carved this for Worth Bagley. That was nice of him, wasn't it?
What?
He bit the dust at the hand of W.F. Keys. May 11th, 1943. You'll see this gravestone if you walk out to Wall Street Mill. It's on the trail. If you stay on the main trail just past the well, you'll see it. And that's where that incident happened, where the occurred.
What's wrong with the gravestone?
They say it's where he bit the dust.
Where he bit the dust, as they called shooting somebody back then. So Keys worked some pretty hard for a 71-year-old, chopping rocks in the sun. So he had some back problems. There was no chiropractor available in the area, so he built a device to alleviate the pain in his back. We're going to go take a look at that right now. See if you can come up with a name for this device. We'll stand in the shade. How about that?
Yeah.
So this device, I saw something like this at the Tower of London. What would you call this?
This looks like a sitting chair.
It looks like a torture device,
Yeah,
doesn't it? The rack.
He
He actually used this to straighten out his back. He would lay down here with his head there. His arms would go around the posts. He had a special pair of boots with a loop in the bottom, which he would tie this rope to. And he would have one of his young sons. Here's another chore for a young boy to do. Would crank that and stretch him out and alleviate. He probably had a ruptured disc or some other type of back problem. His family was even unsure, but the fact was he had back pain, understandably, from the hard work that went on here. Exactly, lifting those rocks.
Yeah.
The whole family worked very hard all day long, and then they would have dinner. And then after dinner, the entire family would come out to the orchard and spend 3 hours a night pulling weeds. So that's after a long day's work. They would continue doing that.
I'd have to
And so Keys would lay out, it would be after dark by the time he would finally get on this and stretch himself out. The young boys' rooms were right here. And so they described that their dad would talk to them and tell them bedtime stories while he was laying out here. Sometimes he would lay on a mattress.
Was it a mattress?
One of the young people here
Yeah, it
mentioned, asked
was.
if this
This
was a
is the-
mattress.
this
Again,
is the
these could be
springs.
used for constructing things, but putting concrete in, or to lay around on. And
Yeah.
for the first tourists in the area,
That's the inside of
you'd
the
get
bed.
to sleep on a mattress if you came out here to visit.
Right.
That's right. So we're going to walk around the side of the house now. You'll be able to look in some of the windows. I want you to look for a very interesting device. It's a refrigerator that does not use electricity or power of any sort. Now, if you look through the window, you're going to see a refrigerator in there. That's a propane refrigerator that was supposedly salvaged from General Patton's training camp during World War II. But I want you to look for the older refrigerator that does not use any sort of power. We'll take a look at that as we walk around the side of the house. See that tortoise shell?
Net in de schaduw, meestal.
It's okay.
I
Let's
see
take a picture.
die schildpadden.
Ja, kijk. Echt waar?
Zie je dat daar schildpadden is?
That's right. That was the store, as they called it. That's where Mrs. Keys worked out of. She sold her bonnets there. Now they were able to grow so much fruit and vegetables and meat from all their cattle. The meat would be stored in a little cave underneath the dam because it was nice and cool. But she would sell the excess material to other ranchers and miners. Maybe an old miner would come up with some gold and say, I don't have any food. She'd trade them. And also the first tourists who started coming here in the 1930s, who wanted to come out here to see how people lived in a place like this. And they would buy material here, they'd buy food. They'd pay a little bit of money sometimes, and they'd get to camp out or stay in a cabin. Sometimes they were put to work. Okay. Can you imagine that? Oh, I went on my vacation and I helped them put vegetables in cans. That was something. Men were often working in the field, helping with some project around here. So where was that refrigerator that I mentioned? A refrigerator that does not use power of any sort. You could see it. We walked right by it. It's hanging off the side. That's right. That's an evaporative cooler or a desert cooler. Same way, I'm living in a place in Joshua Tree that has a swamp cooler. Same concept. The boys would go and get water, and they'd fill a pan that sits on top. And that pan had holes in it, and the water would drip down that burlap, and the little bit of a breeze that comes through here would cool the items inside. So they would keep butter and cheese, eggs, things like that. And those items would stay good for a whole week, even in the middle of the summer.
And there's the door inside.
Yes, that's true. I've never seen anything like this. I'm one of those city people who would have showed up and said, "What the heck? That's not a refrigerator. How could that work?" But this is one of the things that the first tourists who started arriving here in the 1930s wanted to see. And this became a national park in 1936, or a national monument, rather, during President Roosevelt. How's that?
Willie's Jeep.
Yeah, an old Willie's Jeep. A lot of these other vehicles,
Excuse me, Dad.
they actually all did work. He's figured out a way to fix them and get them running.
Michael.
Some of them were abandoned.
The washing machine.
Perhaps you even have something made by this company in your home. Maytag. Yeah. This is the agitator. They'd put the soap and you'd wash the clothes in here. Then they would go through this device called a wringer, and then they'd be rinsed twice. Now there's a common American expression that a lot of us younger people may not know the origins of. And that expression is, they'll put you through the wringer. If they're really going to make things tough for you, they'll put you through the wringer. It comes from this device. I'm not saying anybody here is old enough to remember this, aside from your grandma. But I've had some older folks come on this tour and say, "Oh, my brother got his hand stuck in the wringer when he was a little kid and broke his finger," or "My mom or my grandma got stuck in there." You're supposed to use...
Women get their hair stuck in it.
Or get the hair stuck in the wringer. You're supposed to use a wooden paddle to push the clothes through, of course. Now, they would wash the cleanest clothes first and the dirtiest last. Now, oftentimes when the family would take a bath, they would use the same tub. Who got to bathe first?
Dad's.
Dad's
down to the mountain, and the baby was last. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Learned it at Lake.
And now you
house.
think you should let the cleanest person bathe first, but that's not the way it worked. Dad got to bathe first, and then Mom, and then it went oldest to youngest.
So
There's another common American expression: "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater."
We have that in Holland as well. Baby
So this-
weggooien met het bad
So this is
Yeah.
So that baby
That's the wash machine.
probably would have been better off if it had not bathed,
Right.
because it would have been so nasty, that bathwater. So
Ew.
that's very interesting to hear that that's an expression
this
elsewhere as well.
this is a primitive washing machine.
Yeah, this one is gas powered. Originally they were foot powered. There was a pedal, just like the old sewing machines, and you'd have to sit here and pump this. So if you were one of those visitors coming out here, maybe this would be one of your duties. I got to help use a real old washing machine, and it ran on gas. We had to
And this-
start it up, and
And I suppose this would be the dryer.
that's
the
the
ringer.
ringer. It kind of, in a way, it's drying it out.
it's the-
Actually, sir, the dryer is right here.
I'd say that's the dryer.
What's the
Imagine you'd be
Dryer.
sending a postcard to your family and say, "Those people were drying their clothes on a wagon wheel." That was amazing.
how does this dry your
That's
clothes?
right. They had a hot water heater. Pretty high-tech stuff for the time. This machine still operates.
Really?
It still has oil in it. It's
Madoff
been
used to do
lubricated.
something like that.
I've never started it up, but one of the other rangers did recently.
Back in the early 1900s, my dad said the first thing they did is boil water in the morning.
Boil
They'd
it.
start a fire and boil water
Oh, I
because
bet.
they'd use it all day.
Your
So that
your
probably would have been, of course, of the young boys who lived here at the time.
your
So we're
granddad.
going to just wander up through here. We're gonna
Grandfather did it for sure.
cut down
Oh.
some of the stops. Again, hard work and a lot of salvaged materials that you're seeing here. You'll see other bed springs and bed frames. All those things were going to be used for something. Keys had some idea of what he wanted to do with those. Or if you were one of the first visitors and you had a little bit of money, you could have slept on one of those beds. Or in a cabin that's up at the top of the hill. Now, they had other animals here, like chickens. Our next stop, we're going to take a look at a very interesting chicken coop. I'm pretty sure that you've never seen one like this before. So we're going to walk over there, see if you can identify it.
Wow, it's got wipers. This is the seat, obviously. This is the seat, all ripped and shredded. This is all that soft cottony stuff, of course. Looks like we got ourselves one of those old levers. I don't know what this one is in particular. Lot of levers. These cars like these had a lot of levers like these. I don't know what they're used for. And we got the gauges. I believe that this is the door. I believe this is the door for this car. Take a look at that. The top speed of this vehicle is 70 miles per hour. Not bad.
what they would do is they put the gold ore, it would be mercury smeared into these cracks. The gold ore would be laid out, and then the animal would drag this giant rock on a team around and around and around and crush the ore. This is the most primitive type of mining device. There's a few of these in the park. One of them's really difficult to get to, and I haven't been to yet. There's another one down near Cottonwood Springs, but this one was never used for mining. He just built this just to show people that he could. But he did use it to break and train animals. When people's homesteads would fail, they'd pack up their children and leave and abandon their animals. Really? And so he would go with his kids and gather up horses and donkeys and cows that were running loose, and he'd tie them up to this and break them in and train them. And the U.S. Forest Service heard about this and began bringing animals that they were rescuing from the San Bernardino Mountains, and they would pay him to break them in also. That's what he did with this. Now, behind us there's a single stamp mill, and this crushing the ore that's here. In this park, there were mills that were 5 stamp mills and 10 stamp mills that worked 24 hours of the day, that had people, teams of people working on them. Water had to be pumped through these devices constantly to mix with the ore, so that it would, once it was crushed, flow evenly onto this amalgamation table. The amalgamation table would be covered with mercury, or later cyanide, that would mix with the gold ore and form amalgam. Like you get a filling, that's amalgam. Now, there were 2 different mining periods here in the park. How come? Some people even came back and made a claim on an old site that had been abandoned. Why was that?
Price of gold went up.
That's one of the reasons. The price of gold went up. Also, technology increased. They realized that mercury was less efficient than cyanide. So they would actually go back and just reuse all those old tailings and extract more gold. Cyanide is still used today, even though it's a dangerous chemical. I went on a tour of a mesquite mine down in Imperial County a few months back. Brick tour was there, and I got to hold one. It was a brick about this big. It was worth $1.1 million. And then they frisked me on the way out and wanted me. It was a brick about this big. It was worth $1.1 million. And then they frisked me on the way out and wanted me. I had a little flake of gold under my fingernail as I walked over. I was pretty scared. So once you had amalgam, that was basically ore and cyanide, kind of mixed together. It wasn't very pure, so it would be put into a retort. That's what this device is called, a retort. And the retort would be heated up, usually using gas of some sort. It would cause the mercury to vaporize and go up into this tube and drip down into that bucket. And then that mercury could be taken and used again, and what's left over is called gold matte. That gold matte would then need to be sent off to San Francisco to the mint. And then it would be processed into the pure form of gold bullion. Now, even when Keyes didn't have a successful mine, he operated this stamp mill. He charged other miners $5 a ton to crush that ore, no matter how much gold they got out of it. So he was even able to make a little bit of money just operating this thing that he had put together and had been removed from other mines. It was hooked up to various different devices, all gas powered, and he would crush and stamp that ore. Working around toxic chemicals, cyanide, mercury. We all know that that stuff's not very good for you. Somehow he lived to be 89 years old.
Oh.
And children even worked around this material. I bet they really weren't wearing gloves either, or anything like that. Probably not. So not only did the children have to work on the farm and with mining equipment, but again, Mrs. Keyes expected them to go to school as well. She said, I want my children to have the same education as any child in Los Angeles gets. And so she had Mr. Keyes build a small schoolhouse. They ended up having 3 different schoolhouses on the property. And the final schoolhouse that they built is going to be our last stop. So imagine, now, eventually they hired teachers. They got the county of San Bernardino to pay for it because other ranchers were sending their children here. Like, you know what, we need to get professional teachers here, and the county should pay for it. And that's eventually what happened. And the county would pay for teachers' salaries, they need to have structures built, books, things like that. Now, most of those teachers didn't last very long. They would last about 1 semester. Why was that?
Chasing them around the bushes.
Yeah. No, probably because they were in the middle of nowhere. They were a teacher from the city, perhaps, and they said, "This is crazy. We're far from anything." So, imagine you're one of those teachers showing up here for duty, or for the younger people here, imagine you're one of those students. You're working all day and you're going to school. What would that have been like? All right, we're going to take a walk now back to the schoolhouse. Everyone ready? Yep. Okay.
You still worried about the manual?
The schoolhouse operated until 1943. Now the Dudleys lasted here for 7 years. Prior to coming here, they were missionaries in Burma for 30 years. So they were probably already used to living kind of in a primitive place and under difficult conditions. So they already kind of had the skills that were necessary to live and survive in a place like this.
Amazing how she has her hair.
Yeah. Must have spent some time with that.
Right,
Now,
reflect
these
on that.
children that went to school here, they got the same education as any other kid would get in the city. They published a school newspaper. They went on field trips to Los Angeles to see historic sites and modern buildings and things like that. So they pretty much got to do the same thing that any normal student would get to do, except that they were way out here in the desert and in the middle of nowhere, which I think is pretty amazing. And some of the children ended up going on to college as well, which is also pretty interesting. So you've heard today about all the hard work that went into developing this land and building these structures and what the children had to do, from the hard work to the schooling that they've done. And I've compiled a list of skills that Francis Keyes and Bill Keyes had. And I'm going to read those off. These are the skills that Francis Keyes had. She was a teacher, a cook, a canner, home medicine, seamstress, housekeeper, glass collector, defense plant worker, finance accounting, a mother of 7 children, a bonnet maker, and a stenographer. That's a court reporter. Bill Keyes, these are his skills. Rock mason, miner, prospector, assayer. That's someone who works at a mine who knows the value of minerals. Homesteader, carpenter, blacksmith, farmer, rancher, mechanic, salvage collector, beekeeper, engineer, actor, and entrepreneur. How many of these skills do you have? I looked at this and I came up with about 1. However, visiting historic sites like this and learning about the people who were here before us and all the work they did, I think it's kind of inspiring in a way, because it reminds us that all of us have our own skills that are very different. And if we were put in an environment like this, we'd probably be tested, definitely, but we'd probably have to develop more and more skills in order to make it here. And these people generally, they were successful at what they did. They made a living and they employed many other people throughout the years who came and went through the ranch. And I think it's pretty amazing, their story. And when you're out exploring this park or this country or the world, perhaps you'll develop some new skills as well that might be very useful.
So
You have a question?
yeah, this schoolhouse was built in 1940.
It was built in 1935.
Okay.
And it was
operated till 42.
till 43. That's right. So for about 8 years.
I bet you back in those days,
She was a teacher
Coca-Cola
for 7.
bottles only costed $0.25.
Probably less than that.
Or
I'm older than I look. I remember when you go to McDonald's and get a soda, it was 10 cents.
I remember that too.
really?
So that would have been in the 70s.
How old are you?
25.
Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty amazing. The first drive-through in America was the In-N-Out Burger, and you can still see they have the old prices on some of their photos. So that's right. So things were quite different back then. Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming out today. It's been my pleasure sharing Keyes Ranch with you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit here at Joshua Tree National Park. We are going to make our way back to the entrance now, and I'll unlock the gate for you. If you need to use a restroom or anything, let's please do that out there after I get the gate open, okay?
Yep.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you very
educated
much.
Thanks again.
Great.
My pleasure.
You
Very
got,
informative.
you got
sorry?
ranger books for the...
Oh yeah, sure do. And
Thank you, and Sarah. Person.
I'll grab those two and grab one for you in the car. And did I give your son a Junior Ranger book yesterday?
Yeah, you did.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, you did.
Just wanted to see if anyone else needed one. Okay, great. Well, we're going to make our way back to our vehicles then.
Thanks. It was interesting.
My pleasure. I'm glad you
Smart
enjoyed
people.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty an interesting place. And when first time I saw it, I was like, is this real? Is this a movie set or something?
A movie set.
Like animals that are back to